Assalamualaikum and a very good day to everyone. My name is Muhammad Nakiddin bin Muhammad Daud, and today I'll be presenting to you our group database title, problem statement and database objective. For our group database title, the title is Students Subject Registration Database System for Sekolah Menengah Sains Kubang Pasu. Now, let's move on to the problem statement. In our organization, we currently use the manual document filing. The problem with the current system that our school is facing now is the difficulty of getting quick information from a file. Manual document filing is very time consuming. When teachers want to find a document about a certain student, it will take time to search for specific information about the student. This can cause annoyance for the teachers, and their productivity is lowered by having to spend excessive time to deal with the paper filing system. The next problem that we have to face is lack of security. Paper document filing can be less secure than electronic filing system. Misplaced of document can be easily be placed in the wrong hand. Our students are expecting their information to be secure in our hand. If we cannot keep it safe, it might leak and might cause their life in danger. A cabinet file with files filled with files is way easier to access than a computer which requires a password and credential to get into. The last problem that we are facing is that it is hard to make changes to an existing structure. When you are working with a paper document, it is much harder to make changes. Every time we want to make a change, we will have to make a copy so we are not destroying the original with any edits or comments we might add. This means the editing process is much more time consuming than the digital copies that only took a few seconds to change something in the file. Next, let's move on to the objective of the database. The first objective is to enable the school to manage students' registration electronically. Second, to provide quick access to the students' information. Third, to automatically generate students' registration slip. And last but not least, to enable the school to perform process of inserting, updating, and deleting data easily.
Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Hazri Safarin bin Makno, and I will talk about our entity relationship diagram for our project, which is a database system for student subjects registration. So this is the ERD, and as you can see, for our database system, we have 5 tables, which is table teacher, table class, table subjects, table student, and table registration. Now, let's look at the table teacher and table subject first. For the table teacher, the primary key is teacher ID, included 4 attributes, which is teacher first name, teacher last name, teacher email, and teacher phone number. For the subject table, we have primary key is subject ID, the attribute is subject name, subject description, subject schedule, and subject capacity. Move on to the table class. We can see the primary key is class ID, the attribute is class name, class start time, class end time, and class description. And we have 2 foreign key, which is subject ID and teacher ID. And now for the relationship, we can see the relationship between table teacher and table class is a many-to-many with relationship. So that means if we can read it, it will be each teacher may teach by one or more class, and each class may teach by one or more teacher. For the relationship between table class and table subject is also many-to-many with relationship that we can identify as each class may generate by one or more subject, and each subject may generate at one or more class. For the table student, the primary key is student ID. The attribute is student first name, student last name, student address, and student email. And for the table registration, because this is the multi-value attribute component, the first primary key and foreign key will be class ID, and the second primary key and foreign key will be student ID, included four attribute, which is registration date, registration time, registration place, and registered by. Now for the relationship between table registration and table student is a one-to-many strong relationship that can be identified as each registration must be written in one and only one student, and each student may writing in one and more registration. Lastly, for the relationship between table registration and table class uh, is is also one-to-many strong relationship that can be identified as each class must be listed in one and only one registration, and each registration may listed in one or more class.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Izzat bin Ahmad Daud. I will continue our presentation of the student subject registration database system for Sekolah Menengah Sains Kebun Pasu, which section A, data definition language, which is create table statement. First of all, we have create table statement for the student, which consists of student ID, student first name, student last name, student address, and student email. The student ID is the primary key. After we put it together, it will store in this schema. Student. Next, we move on to the data manipulation language. First, we have the select statement. For the student table, we must insert the student values, which is student ID, first name, student last name, student address, and student email. After we insert all the values in the SQL, it will then store in the student table. And if we select from the course student, the output will show like this.
And now let's move on to the how to create table teacher. First of all, of course, we need to create table teacher, following by the primary key, which is teacher ID, the capacity that can be input into data, and the primary keyword to declare teacher ID as the primary key. And now we need to key in all the attribute, which is teacher first name, teacher last name, teacher email, and teacher phone number. And don't forget to declare the character capacity of each attribute. Now, to input all the data, we need to insert the information into the teacher value. For example, the first data is a teacher ID. The second data is a teacher first name, teacher last name, teacher email, and teacher phone number. and here the output of the table teacher, which are arranged in a perfectly manner.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Zahim Wafi bin Zaisham, and today I would like to show you how to create a table in MySQL based on our ERD. So in this case, I will teach you about how to create the table subjects. So first we have to declare create table, and then we have to name our table, which is in this case our ERD. Based on our ERD, the table name is subjects, and then first we have to identify the primary key of the table. For in this case, in our ERD, the subject's ID is the primary key of our table, so we have to name it as subject's ID, and then we have to declare the capacity for character capacity for our subject's ID. So in this case, it is 15, and then we have to declare it as primary key. Next, we will have in our subjects table we will have subject's name there, which is for example it is mathematics, geography, etc. So and next we have subject description, where this is whether to know that the subject is a core subject or just a normal subject. So next we will have subject schedule, whereas it is the day of the subjects will be teaches. And next we will have subject capacity, where this is the number of student will be enrolled in the subjects. So next we will be input our we will inputting our data into the table subject. So we first have to declare insert into our table name, which is the name of our table is subjects, and values. So, and then we have to input our data. We have to aware that the data have to be input according to the arrangement of its name. For example, in this subject's ID, subject's name, subject description, subject's schedule, and subject capacity. It is in order to don't make mistake in our data. So we have to so for example, here is for our first data, it is S1103, the subject's ID, Bahasa Melayu, which is the subject's name, and wajib diambil, mata pelajaran teras, which is the subject description. So this is a core subject, and then the subject schedule, which is the day of the subject will be held, which is Isnin and Selasa, Monday and Tuesday. And lastly is the capacity for the number of students that can be enrolled in the subject, which is 50 students. So we have inputted all our data. So we will see what is its output. So here is it. It is output of our data. So yeah, that's it.
Assalamualaikum and a very good day. My name is Muhammad Iqmal Faris bin Muaris, and today I would like to explain the create table statement for a table class. To create table class, what we need is the attribute class ID, class start time, class end time, class description, subject ID, and also teacher ID. Apart from that, as you can see, the primary key for this table is class ID, while the foreign keys are subject ID and teacher ID. Moving on, we have the values for table class. First of all, we must insert all the values according to their attributes. For example, C1231 is the value for class ID, Bilik 1 is the value for class name, 9 is the value for class start time, 10:30 is the value for class end time, laboratory is the value for class description, S1511 is the value for subject ID, and lastly T0101 is the value for teacher ID. So finally, to show the output for table class, we must write the SQL command select asterisk from course.class. So here's the output for table class.
Now, for the registration table. To create the registration table, it should consist of the class ID, student ID, registration date, registration time, registration place, and registered by. The class ID and student ID should be the primary key and also the foreign key of the class. To insert all information in the registration table, the first item in the class should be the class ID. Next, it should be the student ID, and then the registration date, followed by the registration time, registration place, and lastly, registered by. Here is an example of registration table output. As you can see, all of the data is aligned correctly with each variable.
Now that me and my group members have presented about the create table statements, I would like to answer some questions on queries. The first two questions are about simple queries. So without further ado, here are the questions. The first question is to display the name and email address of a teacher with the name Sarah. So here's the SQL command for the first question. Select teacher F name, teacher L name, teacher email from teacher, where teacher F name is equal to Sarah. The F in teacher F name stands for first, while the L in teacher L name stands for last. So here's the output for the first question. As you can see, here's the teacher's first name, her last name, and her email. The second question is, write a query that finds all class name that ends with the word room. So here's the SQL command for the second question. Select asterisk from class, where class description like percentage symbol room. So here's the output for the second question. As you can see, the class descriptions only displays the class description that ends with the word room.
Before we move on to the column function, what is a column function? A column function is a function that produces a single value for a group of rows. Now, let's look at the questions example of the column function. The first question is, which subject are taught by the teacher ID T0107? List subject name, teacher last name, and class name. Order by subject name. So here's the solution for the question. First of all, you should select all the variables that the question asks you, which is subject name from the subject table, teacher last name from the teacher table, and class name from the class table. Next, you should use the join query to join all the table as one output. For example, here you can see the subject ID from the subject table is equal to subject ID in class table. Teacher ID from teacher table is equal to teacher ID from class table. Then, you need to look at the question again. The question asks you to give the information for the teacher with the teacher ID of T0107. And lastly, as the question asks you, you should put the order by the subject's name. And here is the sample output of the query. Now, the next question. Question 2. List all subject ID and minimum subject capacity. Group by subject ID. Here is how to answer the question. To do this answer, first, you should select all the data that the question asks, which is the subject ID and minimum subject capacity from the subject table. To find the minimum subject capacity, you need to put the minimum query for the subject capacity and name it as the minimum subject capacity. Lastly, you need to do the group by for the subject ID. And here is the sample output for the question.
Next, we look at the retrieving data from multiple tables using the joining database table. The question is, by using join, display the full name of teacher in the class name. First, we select the teacher F name, teacher L name, C class name, concat the teacher first name, teacher last name as the teacher name from teacher T class C, where teacher ID equal to C.teacher ID, order by C.class name. Let's relook at the MySQL. Then we run the output. Will show the teacher first name, teacher last name, class that they teach, and the name. Question 2 is, by using join, display the subject name and the class name. Select s.subject name, c.class name from the subject s, class s, where s.subject id equal to c.subject id. Then we try to run it. The output will show the subject name and the class name. For example, science will be in the bilik 1. Next is question 3. By using join, display the student's name and registration date. First, we select s.studentFname, student.studentLname, r.registration date, concat s.studentFname, studentLname, sname from students, s registration r, where s.studentid equal to r.studentid. Try to run it. As it shown, the output will show the student F name, student L name, and the registration date. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you.
So now let's move on to subquery. So what is subquery? Subquery is simply means a query inside a query, where this subquery expressed in the parentheses. So for the first query statement known as outer query, while the inner statement is known as the inner query. So inner query will execute first, and output for inner query is used as the input for the outer query. It is sometimes subquery refers as the nested query. So let's look at the example. So we have this code here. So this is the example of the subquery, where we have this select until not in is the query, and select until the bracket, and the first bracket until the end of the bracket is the again a query. So we have, in this code, we see that there is a query inside a query. So so now we will look at the question example. So firstly, we have to first we have list all the registration detail of those students that register on 29 December 2020. So what we have here, the code that have been written down. So first we have to select star, as the question requires us to display all the details. So the star is used. From is used to where you want to the data, which table you want to the data to be retrieved. So in this case is registration, where we have to make a subquery here, the student ID in, select the student ID from registration, where the registration date. So the question mentioned that the registration date is 29 December 2020. So we have to input the correct date as the question as the question. So in this case, we have to input a 2020, 12, and 12 is the month, and 29 is the date. So now we will see the output. So now it's all display all the detail for the registration date of the registration on the 29th December 2020. So let's move on to the second question. Display subject name, class description, and teacher's name who work in a class that has the word room in its description. So we have to use join in this question because it is the data is selected from more than one table. So we have to select S. S is from subjects, subject name. C is from the table class name. C, class description, is also from the table C. T dot teacher F name, which is the teacher first name, is retrieved from the teacher table, and also the T, teacher's last L name, which is the teacher's last name, also retrieved from the teacher's table. Where so we have to find the foreign that have the similarity of foreign key and the primary key. So in this case, S is subject ID is the this is the primary key of the subjects, and also it has similarity but different, but the in the class table, subject ID is a foreign key. And then we also must choose from the teacher's ID, because teacher's ID has this similar primary and foreign key in the class table also. So in the teacher ID is the primary key for the teacher's table, and also teacher ID is the foreign key for the class table. And we have to declare a subquery here, C class ID in, select class ID from class, where class description like room percent of room percent. So the percent is the used for to obtain whether even the character of room in front, whether in front or the back. So if even though the data of the character of room is the front or the back of the data, so it will the SQL will choose the data also. So let's run it to see the output. So as you can see, now the detail have been chosen. So this all is room, Islamic education room, screening room. So that is for the output for the subquery. So the conclusion is our project is to ease not only the students registration for their subject, and also for their teachers, and also our project will help others to maybe to keep the data, the student data safely, and also list the mistake of making in during the registration. That's all. Thank you.